Have you ever thought, why do I suck at fantasy football? Welcome. This is the Commissioner Fantasy Football Podcast.
Thank you for joining me in discussing the basics about fantasy football. And this episode is really special, or specifically special for those who, if you're playing for the first time in fantasy, maybe it's your second or third year and you didn't have a good time and you haven't won yet. These are some of the fundamentals a lot of people miss in fantasy football, and I'm going to kind of go over them step by step today. So one of the first things I want to talk about is the type of league you play in. Most common leagues are 8-team and 10-team leagues. Most common leagues are 10-team and 12-team leagues. You'll probably find leagues that are 8-team leagues and probably 14, 16, but you probably won't find those because a lot of experts play in those leagues. Now, the first time I played fantasy football, which now is almost 8 years ago, with my brothers and a few people from church, we played in the 8-team league. In those leagues, it's pretty easy because you're getting the best players out there. You're not looking into the players that you don't know about. So if you're a typical normal normal football fan, you know of the common players. Like in our day right now, it's Christian McCaffrey, Ezekiel Elliott, Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. These names are well known. So in the 8-team league, you're basically getting all the famous names. So it's pretty easy, and that's not a bad place to start playing fantasy football. Look, I started playing there, and I fell in love with fantasy football in the 8-team league. But it became not fun anymore. So we moved on. Again, you could get 2 more people. We found 2 more people, and we created a league, 10-team. And majority of leagues that I play in are 10-team leagues. And those are the most fun. They're very competitive. So the reason for the even number, if you don't know anything about fantasy football, the reason for the even number of teams is because every week you're playing against somebody else, so the teams have to be even. There is this thing in fantasy football, it's not very common, but it's called a roto league, which you can have 7, odd number teams. You're not playing against each other every week, you're just gaining points every week. At the end of the year, whoever has the most points, you win. Pretty simple. All right, so what I'm going to start talking about right now is kind of the basics of what you're setting a lineup for every week. So after your draft, after football starts, that week 1, usually games start on a Thursday. And so that's the typical NFL schedule that we have to follow. And the week in fantasy football follows that type of schedule. So the first week starts on a Thursday, then you'll get majority of your games on Sunday morning, afternoon, there's a night game, and then for example, in week 1, there's 2 games on Monday night. So your usually week ends on Monday. So that's the scoring format. So whatever your team is scoring, it starts on Thursday, ends on Monday. Pretty simple. Now, your team, after your draft, you're going to have a starting lineup, and then you're going to have your bench players. Now, the key thing about the bench players, the most important thing is whoever's on your bench, their points will not count for your total points against the person you're playing with. So if you bench somebody, hey, tough luck to you. So make sure your starting lineup is set. That's the only thing I think that you have to be really concerned about after doing your draft and your first week, is making sure the players are active. They're not injured. They don't have a bye week, for example. So you want to put the starting players who are playing. Now again, you're going to have these weeks where a person on your bench is going to go off. Look, it happens every year, almost every week, or sometimes every other week. You won't pick the right player. It's just bad luck, and it happens. So, but again, you want to pick the best players to put into your starting lineup. So your starting lineup in most common leagues is 1 quarterback. So most common leagues have 1 quarterback starting slot. Then you have usually 2 running backs. Some leagues I've seen with 3 running backs, but majority of leagues are 2 running backs. Then you get to your wide receivers, and this is where I think it's almost 50-50. A lot of leagues have 2 wide receivers, and there's leagues that have 3 wide receivers. We play, a majority of leagues that I play in are 3 wide receivers. The reason for that is there's more wide receivers than any other position for the offensive positions. And most leagues play with 1 tight end. And then you get your kicker, which no longer do we use kickers in the leagues that I commission in. We no longer have kickers. We got rid of those. And you'll have a defense, meaning that you're going to play a team like, for example, Packers or the Vikings. I'm thinking of a good defense right now for this coming year is the Buffalo Bills, the Baltimore Ravens. They have some good defense coming into this year. So if you pick a team, whatever that team does, they cause turnovers, they cause fumbles. Those points, and I'll talk about it a little later, those points add up for you, positive points. So the more points you gain, against your opponent, you win. All right, so we went over the players you start. I talked about bench players. Again, very important. People on your bench do not count. You can't put them in. You can't retroactively put them into your lineup if somebody's having a good game, you can't go in and put them in. They're all locked. So make sure you do that. There's one more thing I didn't mention is a lot of leagues have IR spots, injury reserve spots, or some leagues call it in the injury list. And now because of this whole COVID-19, now a lot of leagues are entering or into their leagues, they're implementing COVID-19. So if a player has COVID-19, you could put him into that slot. And the biggest reason to have an IR slot or an injury reserve slot or whatever, they might be calling it special COVID slots, is because you want to make room on your bench for other players. So basically this extends your bench. So if you have an injured player, you put him on the injury reserve. Now you have an extra spot in your bench to go pick up a player. So that's something important to know. So a lot of people, beginners who play fantasy football, they have an injured player and they just leave him on their bench, which they can put him into this IR spot, and now they have another person they could pick up and use possibly. So that's very important. A lot of people make that mistake. All right. Now we're going to get into scoring. This is where fantasy football can be complicated, of how it's scored. And before the internet, before the apps, before the app doing all the scoring for you, we have great apps now that just literally, it's all on your phone. You look at your phone and literally everything's just being calculated for you. Before that, before my time, before I even played fantasy football, the commissioner used to have to go in at the end of the week and calculate everybody's points manually. But I want to go over with you the reason you want to know how your league is scoring points, because different leagues vary in the way they score points. So it's very important for you to know how these points are scored in your league. So we'll start with the quarterback position. This is the most common position in fantasy football. Quarterback position, every time he throws a touchdown, it's 4 points. It's the most common. There are a lot of leagues now that play in the 6 points per touchdown. So instead of getting 4 points, you get 6 points. The problem with that, and a lot of people have argued with me in our league, because I brought this up before about 2 years ago. I say, hey, how about we go to scoring 6 points? And they say, hey, that's not fair, because if you draft a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, for example, or Patrick Mahomes, or be way back in the day, Michael Vick, they will be the quarterbacks who rush in touchdowns. They're more known for rushing it in, so they have more value. And so people say, well, if I draft this guy and I have, for example, Matt Ryan throwing 6 touchdowns, rushing touchdown, the passing touchdowns shouldn't be equal. And again, you can be on both sides of that argument. In our league, what I determined, I said, hey, how about we just do 5 points? So a lot of leagues allow you to do 7. They allow you to do whatever number you want. You could customize your leagues. So in our league, what we did is we customized to give a little less than 6 points per passing, so we give 5 points. But the leagues you're probably playing in are 4 points, and that's very standard. Now, for every 25 yards that a quarterback passes, that is 1 point. So going for totals, because again, I want to show examples, is if a quarterback throws, let's say, 100 yards in a game, which is pretty low. It's not a good quarterback. But if he throws 100 yards, that equals a total of 4 points because 25, 25, 25, 25. So multiplication here is 100 points. Now, majority of quarterbacks throw over 200 yards. A lot of them throw over 300 yards. That's very common. So an example I'll use is Aaron Rodgers. Let's say Aaron Rodgers has a game, he throws 300 yards. Pretty common for Aaron Rodgers. Maybe not now as common as it was before. Packers fan sucks. But let's say he throws 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. So 300 yards equals times 4. So you do basically math. 3 times 4, that's 12 fantasy points. On top of that, he threw 4 touchdowns. 4 touchdowns times 4 per touchdown. That's 16 points. So now his total for that week for your team is 28 fantasy football points. Now for quarterbacks, that's pretty good. That's a really good week. 28. Anything above 20 points, I think, for quarterbacks is amazing. So 1 week, you have Aaron Rodgers. He throws 4 touchdowns, 300 yards. You got 28 fantasy football points on your team. Now, there are some consequences for quarterbacks who throw interceptions. I'm not going to mention Jameis Winston. I'm not going to mention that guy, but he throws a lot of interceptions. And so in most leagues for fantasy football have -2 points. For every interception thrown, you get deducted 2 points. Some leagues, like our league, we went down to 1 point. I've seen leagues that just don't give any negative points, which I disagree with. But again, every league, you could customize your leagues. Now, I want to mention one more thing is in different leagues, especially in our league, I love giving some bonus points. So for a quarterback throwing over 300 yards, we give 2 bonus points. Because again, it's not that easy for a quarterback to hit 300 yards. It's, I think, a little less common, but it happens a lot, and we want to reward quarterbacks for that. So again, there's all these different opinions on that, but in our league, that's what we do. Let's move on to running backs. So running backs I mentioned before, there's a lot of wide receivers. The next position in fantasy football, there's a lot of running backs. Not as many as wide receivers, but every team basically has a running back. So for every running back that rushes 10 yards, that is 1 point. For every rushing touchdown, that is 6 points. And so I'll give you an example. Christian McCaffrey is an amazing guy, probably going first round. If you have a first round pick this year, make sure you take Christian McCaffrey. Now, Christian McCaffrey, let's say he rushes 120 yards, right? And then he scores 2 touchdowns, which is pretty common. That was very common for him last year. A lot of people won with him championships. I didn't have him, so didn't win any championships last year. But so 120 yards equals 12 points because every 10 yards is a point. We're doing some math here, so kind of stick with me. 2 touchdowns, 6 points per touchdown. That is 12 points. 12 plus 12. Christian McCaffrey this week for you has 24 fantasy points. That's 1 running back. So imagine having 2 amazing running backs. They can equal or way surpass a quarterback. A quarterback averaging 28 points, but if you have 2 running backs getting you over 20 points, that is amazing. And that's how people win leagues, when they have these type of players. Now again, same thing as a quarterback, same thing for running backs. You do get points deducted. So Christian McCaffrey, which he barely has any fumbles, but let's say he has a fumble during the game, a lot of leagues score that -2 points. Some leagues, again, have -1. So it varies. And also there's bonus points for that as well. In our league, if a running back rushes 100 yards, we give 2 extra bonus points. Something I love to do. We're going to move on now to wide receivers and tight ends. And the reason I put the wide receivers and tight ends together is because they receive catches. So they play different positions, but they do this basically the same thing, scoring format. They catch passes, they catch touchdowns. So basically these players are receivers and tight ends are tied into this same category. And it's basically similar to the running backs. For every 10 yards a player catches, you get a point. You catch a touchdown, you get 6 points. Pretty simple. Same thing with negative points. If a player catches football and he's running and he loses it, he fumbles it, same thing. -2 points, -1 point. And the same thing I do, and I love doing this in our leagues, if a player catches over 100 yards, 100 or over, an extra 2 bonus points. So I'll give you an example. Julio Jones, amazing running back again. He's going in most leagues in the first round. He's getting older in that age, but this guy is amazing at getting yards, over 100 yards. So let's say Julio Jones gets 160 yards in a game and 1 touchdown. 160 yards equals 16 fantasy points. 1 touchdown equals 6. 16 plus 6 equals 22. Pretty simple math. But again, your app on your phone literally does this for you. So if you're out there and you're still debating about playing fantasy football, it is so easy to play now. It literally, everything is done on your phone live. You can literally sit there on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. and see your scoring change. So now we have kickers to talk about. Now kickers, like I said before, I don't play with kickers in any leagues anymore. But kickers scoring format is pretty simple. Kickers, anything under 39 yards is 3 points. Anything from 40 yards to 49 yards is 4 points, and anything over 50 yards is 5 points. An example, let's say I'll give you Justin Tucker. Great kicker. If you get him, he usually gets drafted out of the kickers pretty early. Let's say Justin Tucker kicks 3 field goals, right? 2 of them are 35-yarders, and 1 of them is over 50 yards. So the 2 35-yarders count for 3 points each. That's a total of 6 points. Okay? And then his big kick over 50 yards, which is pretty hard for kickers to do, is 5 points. 5 plus 6, he gets 11 points. I'm going to later on talk about why your league shouldn't have kickers. But again, common leagues, your league that you're playing in will have a kicker. Very normal. All right. And same thing, if your kicker misses a kick, a lot of leagues have a negative point. Some leagues don't have any negative points. Now, the last and final position is the most complicated one. And I'm not going to get into depth about it. And we're even thinking about opting out of playing defenses because of the complicated scoring in fantasy football. But you don't have to worry about it because the app does it for you. But what you have to worry about is how it's being done. And on top of that, for your defense and scoring, one thing you have to worry about is a lot of leagues have special teams involved in it as well. So for example, let's say you play a defense, Baltimore Ravens are a great defense. I'm going to use them as an example. So if you're looking at your app and you're starting Baltimore defense and you see right away they give you like an added 10 points. And you're like, well, what happens with that is they give you 10 points to start off with. Most leagues give you 10 points to start off with. Now, as the other team scores on Baltimore Ravens, let's say they scored 2 touchdowns, you're getting negative points now. So instead of you're seeing 10, it goes down to 6, goes down to 5. Now, if you're the Baltimore Ravens, if they get a turnover, that's 2 points. If they cause a fumble, that's 2+ points. If they score a touchdown as a defense or a special teams, you get 6 points. So it is complicated. And again, majority of leagues play with defenses, but that's how the scoring kind of goes. So, and again, it varies from league to league. Now, I'm going to finish off and talk about the types of leagues that are out there. The most common league that's been around for a while is the standard league, meaning that you don't get any points for catches, you don't get any points for rushing, except the standard points that we talked about. Now, you probably heard of leagues like a half-point league or a full PPR league. So there's half-point PPR, full-point PPR. Half-point PPR, all that means is that every time a wide receiver, wide receiver, a running back, or a tight end catches the ball, instead of getting that, whatever yards he's getting for that catch, on top of that, you're getting a half a point for each catch. And if you go full point PPR, That means instead of getting a half point, every time a player catches the ball from the quarterback, they catch the ball, you get a full point. And the problem with that is a lot of people have different opinions about full point PPR or half point PPR, especially about full point PPR when it first came out. The problem with that is, I'll give an example. Let's say I'll compare Julio Jones and Julian Edelman. Great two examples of how the scoring can vary from a full point PPR to a standard non-PPR. So I'll take Julio Jones and Julian Edelman as examples in the full point PPR. Let's say both of them get 100 yards, right? Both players get 100 yards. Now Julio Jones, he's known for getting long passes. So Julio Jones can get 2 passes and have 100 yards. Julian Edelman, in his days with Tom Brady, wasn't known for that. He was known for getting 7 to 8 to 9, sometimes 11 catches a game. He gets short passes, 9-yard passes. He catches the ball in the slot. And so Julio Jones has 2 passes. Julian Edelman has, in this example I'll use, he caught 10 passes. That's a big difference right there, because they both have 100 yards, but in the full point PPR league, Julio Jones only has 10 points. Let's say I'll also say they didn't catch a touchdown. No touchdown that game. They both have 100 yards. Julio Jones has 2 catches. So he has 10 points plus 2 PPR points. His total for the day is 12 points. Julian Edelman, on the other hand, has 100 yards, but he has 10 catches. So he has 10 points for the 100 yards, and then he has 10 catches, which equal 1 point per catch. That's 20 points. You see the difference, right? This is why a lot of people argue for the full point PPR. So a lot of people then say, hey, well, let's go halfway. And then the most popular format that people play in is the half point PPR. Now, I'm going to promote an app that's the best app out there. We use it for the leagues I commission in. It's called the Sleeper app. Now, this Sleeper app gives you a whole nother level of scoring in this kind of PPR setting. And it's called tier PPR, meaning that a player, and then another problem I had to mention, imagine a player catching a pass and getting no yards. It happens pretty often. So let's say Julian Edelman catches a pass and he doesn't get any yards, so he has no points, but because he caught a pass, he gets 1 point. Seems unfair. And that's another argument a lot of people use against PPR. But in tier PPR, which the Sleeper app only has, look up the Sleeper app. Amazing app. In tier PPR, what happens is you can construct the league, as I did for myself. You can do this because it gives you the opportunity. Most other apps don't do that. So what I did in this league is from a person catching 0 to 0 to 9 yards, that equals, I gave it a 0.25. So even half of a half. So 0.25 for those catches. Now anything from 10 to 19 yards, I give a half a point, 0.5. Anything from 20 to 29 yards, I give 0.75. 0.75. Still not a whole full point PPR point. And then anything over 40 yards, we score it as a full point PPR. It kind of balances the issue that these people were having against full point PPR. And so we love it. We've been doing it for now 2 years. It is amazing. So hopefully these fundamentals, these basics about fantasy football help you to do better in your league. That's the most important thing, is when you get in a fantasy football league, you want to have some fun, but you want to know what you're doing or how the scoring is formatted. How the scoring is formatted in your league. All right, and I'll conclude on this. The biggest thing I've learned through my history of playing fantasy football is I've been playing in a lot of leagues, especially the last 2 years. Last year, I played in 11 different leagues, and all of the leagues had different types of scoring. The most important thing, the league you're playing, you might be playing just one league. Look up the rules, look up the scoring in your league. If you know the rules, if you know the scoring, how the scoring is formatted, then you can make the best decisions of the type of players you're gonna choose for your league. as an example I showed, if you're playing the full point PPR league, you're going to look for players like Michael Thomas. He's another. Julian Edelman doesn't have Tom Brady anymore, so I don't know what the hell's going to happen with that guy this year. But Michael Thomas is an example of a Julian Edelman. He catches 7 to 9 passes a game. He doesn't get a lot of yards, but this player in the PPR league is more valuable than, for example, a Julio Jones. So hopefully this information helped. Again, I'm going to be coming up with a lot more podcasts about the basics of fantasy football. Again, good luck to you if you're playing this year. If you have any questions, you can hit me up on Instagram. Again, good luck.
Dude, you better not be sleeping after that podcast. That was an amazing message. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe to the YouTube channel, The Commissioner. Also subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Any comments, questions, concerns, send them to the Instagram page, The Commissioner, your fantasy football guide.